Martha, I want to start with you. You were here in D.C. when this attack happened. Um, you had a husband who was working in the Pentagon. You yourself working at the State Department. I wonder what sticks in your mind, both personally but also professionally, because of course you were reporting that day.
Well, I think first of all, it can't help but be immediately personal when you have an attack on your homeland, and you can go through the day. You can be a journalist. You can do your job that we all did. And when you go home at night, you're a scared American. My husband, Tom Jelton, was in the Pentagon that day, a correspondent for NPR. I was at the State Department for ABC that day. And Tom and I had driven in that morning together right after the first plane hit and started heading in immediately. And you know, just today looking at the timeline again and when the planes hit, and I remember being on Memorial Bridge and I called my daughter who was a freshman in college, sophomore in college, and my son was in the 4th grade. So I immediately called my daughter, obviously didn't call my son, told her to turn on the news, went to the State Department, Tom went to the Pentagon, and the second plane hit. And then the State Department was evacuated, and there were fears that there was a bomb in the parking lot. There were so many rumors going around that day. I spent the entire day on Memorial Bridge, and when the Pentagon was hit, I think I really put on my journalist hat then because I really couldn't think about Tom. And I'm not a huge worrier, so he's fine. It's a huge building. I know it's a huge building. Obviously, he was fine. But to see the smoke rise from that building all day and see the fighter jets going down the Potomac River and hearing all day, because we had walkie-talkies because the cell phones were pretty much down that day, and hearing that there was another plane headed for D.C. And I remember saying to my cameraman, oh my gosh, they're going to hit the Washington Monument. He's like, no, they're going to hit the Capitol. They're going to want mass destruction. And then in between, you know, you're trying to manage your personal life, and I'm worried about my son, and is he okay at school, and is my daughter okay, and is Tom okay? And Tom finally got through to me. Is my mother okay? You go through that, but you do have to just keep doing what you're doing, and you also think of all the people who've lost their lives, and then you just know you can keep doing what you're doing to report on that story.
Harrowing, really, to listen to. Pierre, you happened to be in New York on the day of 9/11. You happened to find yourself then on set with Peter Jennings. Talk to us about what it was like to report, to see Peter Jennings lean into his instincts as he was anchoring the news, but also what were you hearing from your sources at the FBI?
Well, you know, just thinking about that day, it just brings up a wealth of emotions. I had been in New York to meet some of the ABC News brass. I had been at ABC News at that point 9 months, and there were some people in New York I had not met. And that morning, after a thunderstorm kept us in New York overnight, my wife called me a little bit after 9 and said, did you see that plane hit the World Trade Center? And immediately I thought it was a small propeller plane. And then I turned on the television and saw that it was much worse than that. And as you said, the next thing I know, I'm on the set with Peter Jennings, John Miller, who was then an ABC News correspondent and a former public affairs director for the NYPD. And there's this moment when the first tower comes down. And Peter immediately knew that there were no words. So he raised his hand on the set just like that, which was a signal to all of us to say nothing. And in that moment, you're horrified for the people that are in the building, and you just cannot believe what is unfolding. And when that first tower came down, it was if something biblical was happening, the way that smoke and debris sort of moved through the city. And my sources were shell-shocked. They knew that this was an epic failure. They knew that this was something that they would have to answer for in terms of the law enforcement community. But their immediate response was just stunned and anger. And among the first tips that I got was that the FBI was going to descend on those airports because my sources said the flight manifest will be the key to understanding who did this and who directed them. They immediately were telling me about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden being their primary suspect because, as you recall, the CIA director, George Tenet, hair was on fire, worrying about that Al-Qaeda was planning something. So they were suspicious that it was Al-Qaeda, but my sources said, we have to get to the airports. We have to find out who was on those planes. And it just was a searing, grotesque day is the best way to describe it.